Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's jump into today's episode.
To point back to that, I started out as Lori Lau in my maiden name, very proud of my Cuban heritage, which is very funny because it is something that does not show. Blonde hair, blue-eyed, light skin. No one ever believes that I am Hispanic, which is a pretty interesting journey, I must say, especially going through the complexity of DEI these days. That
yes,
I get to see it from a very different point of view than some of my Latina sisters that sit beside me. But anyway, so that's my claim to fame, is being a Lao. So my journey, I like to remind myself of where I came from, because I think it keeps me very humble. It keeps me honest. And I own it. I never want to get too far away from it. It's not a place that while I love escape hatches in my life, I'm always looking for them. It's not a place I've ever wanted to escape, because remembering that I started out as a young girl living in a single wide trailer in the middle of Miami in Sweetwater. If anyone knows where that is, it will bring very vivid, very, very vivid memories. But it is, it was a tale of despair, really, as I was growing up. It really was. My father would leave frequently, God bless him. He was the person that probably taught me about escape hatches. The good news is I've learned how to use them productively in my life through watching him take them unproductively many times. So God love him. He knows I give him a hard time, but I started out in the middle of Miami in a very unfortunate place, and spent a lot of time by myself. I was an only child, definitely what they call a latchkey kid. And through the years, I was there by myself, because most of the time my mother had two jobs. She was an executive secretary by day, and by night, the very second job that I knew that my mother had was working at Farm Stores, which was this little convenience store that you drive up. You'd say, "I'd like some ice cream," and she'd hand it to you out of the window. It was like right next to the 7-Eleven. I remember it very well. And then my mom would come home late at night, and then have to get up and do her executive secretary job in the morning. And I always admired my mom. I looked up to her immensely. And I just thought that she was the world. And I loved the job she did. I remember when I would play pretend as a child, I would always pretend to be her, because I just thought I loved her. She dressed up every day so beautifully, and she'd go to this place, and I knew that she kept everybody organized, and she kept the business running, and I knew what she did, and I knew how she did it. So I was never under any false pretense that she was the CEO. I knew she was his admin. Back then she was his secretary. Yeah. And so I always admired that. As I grew up, unfortunately, again, we bounced around a bit, my mom and I, because she was trying to make it as a single parent. And one of my best memories at growing up was my first job. My first job was at Burger King when I was 15 years old. And that's because it was across the street from the apartment that we lived in. At that point, we had moved into a 1-bedroom apartment. And my mom, in order to spend more time with me, got a job at Burger King with me. So then my mom is executive secretary during the day. And then at night, she'd meet me at Burger King, where we would work the night shift together. One of us in drive-through, the other one at the counter. And that was one of my fondest memories, is that my mom and I working at Burger King together, my first job, her second job, and just having a blast. We absolutely had a great time together. But there were a lot along the way, there were a lot of pillars being formed, pillars to what I would like to believe today. I'm calling it a bridge that was going to get me from that life to something very different in the future. And I wouldn't know what that would be for a long time, but I knew that I did not want this. I knew
Mhm.
why I was there. I knew what was happening. I was not oblivious to any of it. And so I would go from that place with my mom at Burger King, and unfortunately, I would take a dip down before I would find my rise. My dip down was sometime in my senior year of high school. I decided that my long-term boyfriend at the time that I'd been with 2 years, long-term 2 years, that I wanted to I wanted to have a baby. And so if you can imagine, I got pregnant in my senior year. I dropped out of high school
Wow.
and I lived on my own. I was 17 and I was on my own. My mom had moved on, and I was there having to make it. I dropped out of high school because I had to be able to support myself. I was now responsible for my own living. And that path, short may it be, from making my own decision, the very first decision I would make was that I was going to get pregnant at 17. And what a crazy decision that would be, to the decisions that would follow, being married to someone that had some addiction issues, and realizing, waking up in the midst of that and realizing my own excellence and knowing this is not my life. This might be
Wow.
someone else's life. This is not my life. And so I went on like that for about 2 years before I realized I wasn't going to do this. I wasn't going to be anyone's statistic. This isn't what I was going to do. And so I woke up one morning, packed up everything I could pack into my car, and I went and stayed with my mother for a few months, started a brand new job on that very same day at a bookstore.
What?
And the it ironic, again, I'll just go there, and you can decide what you take, what you leave here. But the very first person I met at that job is now my husband. I kid you not. So
What?
I packed up that car in the morning. I said, this is not the life for me. I'm not going to live it. I put my son in the back seat. We went to my mom's. I dropped my son off. I went to work my very first day at B. Dalton Bookseller in the mall. And the very first employee I met would be my husband. Of course, I would never know that at the time. I was 20. He was 17. He still kids me
Wow.
today. He says that I took him out of the cradle. That is not how it happened. But we were just really good friends for a lot of years as I was trying to find out what that would look like next. And so B. Dalton was the start of my new life. And then I went to the college, and I figured out, how was I going to be able to afford college as a single mother? But I knew I needed it. I knew I had to get that education, because I knew that my path was so much greater than what had been in the past couple of years. And so I went to Daytona State, and I signed up for the hospitality program. And I was a very, very active student. I knew how fortunate I was to be there. I absolutely used every resource available to me, whether it was grants or scholarships, anything that I could do to pay my way through college without having to bury myself in a student loan, I was going to do, all the while raising this beautiful boy. That really was my incentive. He was my motivation. I knew what I was in it. I was in it for more than myself. It
Mm-hmm.
was joining that program. They said you have to get a job in hospitality immediately. At the time, they were wise enough to tell you you weren't going to graduate and become the general manager. Um, and so it was in that moment that I went and I found my next job, and I got into a Holiday Inn Oceanfront as a 3 to 11
Woo!
desk clerk. I thought I was something else as a
Oh my goodness. I want to go back for a second, Lori. What made you decide on hospitality? Was that intentional?
yeah. So when I was in high school, I was fascinated with travel. Not that I ever was able to travel as a child, never happened.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but something fascinated me. And so I started taking these long distance courses for hospitality. So back then, this is like 86, 87, they would mail me the books. I would get them out of the mailbox. You would do the work in the workbook, you put it back in the mail, and you send it back.
Wow.
And the program, I did this while I was in high school for a couple of years. Got out of high school, obviously, and went through all of that. Did get my high school diploma. I went back and got those 3 credits. And then I went to the office, the counselor's office at the college, and I said, I can't decide between these two things. I either want to do hospitality or I want to be a dental hygienist. That was it. The lady said, you are not going to be a dental hygienist. So let's get you signed up for hospitality. And here I am. Here I
Wow.
am. I could be cleaning teeth right now, Karen.
Yes, you
I
could
could
be.
be the best tooth cleaner in the whole darn world.
And you would be, I'm sure.
I'm telling you.
So let's go back to
Um,
Holiday Inn.
yeah.
So you're excited, you're there.
Oh,
Tell us
I
more.
loved it. I knew I'd found my place. I loved being at the front desk. And, you know, if I bring it back just a minute, you know, one of the things I loved about being at the front desk is I always idolized what my mother did. And it was this, you know, administrative as it was, there was just a lot of organization that went into what my mom did. And we know that these days. It's like now that I've had the benefit of working beside some of the best administrative assistants, and I believe I am the very best administrative assistant. I think it really taught me a very valuable lesson in, I would come to know it later as servant leadership, what I believe I do today as the chief commercial officer for Kessler is I admin for all of our sales, revenue, and marketing professionals. My job every day is to get the obstacles out of the way, get them their resources, make sure that they know how to use their time wisely and be successful. It's what I do every single day. And so, not unlike my mother, who was the executive secretary, I'm a chief commercial officer, and we do very similar things. Who would ever believe that? But it's true.
Wow. Wow.
So that when I was sitting there in the 3 to 11 desk clerk, I'm organizing the keys. I have to write what's happened in the logbook. I got to check you in, get your payment. You got to sign the reg card. All of these things, I could feel that this was home. Like I know this feeling. I know what this is. And I think that, you know, one thing led to another. 3 to 11, the front desk manager position became available, raised my hand right away. I was promoted to that. I'll never forget my first salary negotiation. Oh my gosh. I made $17,200. I thought I was rich. I was rich. I had made it. $17,200 a year. I was there. And then from there, you know, it just grew and it grew and it grew. A lot of hard work, a lot of determination, a lot of commitment, and an ability and a willingness to follow paths. I think before you can lead, you must be willing to follow. And it's
that's
from
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's from following the good and following the bad. I think I may have learned more by following some of the bad than I did the good. Because
say more about that.
Yeah, well, because you start to understand when I would be under leaders that were not necessarily doing the right thing, I was still paying as much attention as I was to those that were doing the right thing. And so I was learning what you don't do. I was learning how important it was to listen, 2 ears, 1 mouth. I still have trouble with that today. I like to talk. My boss would tell you, my boss just told me 3 days ago, Lori, 2 ears, 1 mouth. Okay. But I think that was really important, was being very observant and respecting the journey that I was on, which maybe I find a little bit of concern in today's environment where we have this generation, whatever generation it is, I'm not going to name it, but this generation wants to go from 0 to 60 very fast, much like their cars. They want to do it in 3.2 seconds. And I hate that for them, because I believe there's so much to gain by being willing to take the journey. Yes. Because if you go from 0 to 60, then you have to learn on your own. It's a lot of falling flat on your face. It's a lot of dusting yourself off. And then it becomes a bit of an integrity issue. Do you really have what it takes to be at 60 when probably you should be at about 30 miles an hour right now?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I want to come back to something you said earlier about how you were so confident the way you said it. I raised my hand for that one at the front desk. And what do you think it was for you that gave you that confidence? And what would you, if you think about other women perhaps that are listening to this, or anybody, frankly, who doesn't have that, what advice would you offer?
Bottom line is I self-describe myself. I am scrappy. I am very scrappy, but you have to be, right?
Yeah.
And it's not a pretty word and it doesn't elicit most people want to say I'm polished and I'm this and I'm that. I'm scrappy. I learned very early on in life, if you want something, A, you better ask for it. And
Mhm.
B, you better ask for it, meaning use your voice, use your confidence, believe who you are and believe you are worth it. And that is something that did not come hard for me. It was just simply my reality. If I wanted to get the attention of early on my father, I had to be loud. I had to be confident because that's what he expected of me. There
Huh.
was never going to be a mouse in his house, trust me. And so it was important that if I needed something that I asked for it and I didn't just assume that somebody was going to know that that's what I needed or what I wanted. So when I got into college, I asked for the help and I found it. When I got into the workplace, I asked for the position and I earned it.
Mhm.
But I think that scrappiness, if you will, if you break that down, and I don't really know the definition of scrappy, maybe I'll look at it afterwards, but in my world, the definition is that I will work harder than anyone around me to prove to you that I am the expert. And then I will ask you to acknowledge me as the expert.
Ooh, how do you do that? The
You put the
acknowledgement.
work in.
How do you get
You
the acknowledgement though, when you
you
say you will
ask for
ask
it.
people?
You
And say
ask
more
for
about
it.
that. Be able give us a
Yeah.
tangible. Yeah, how does that look?
Okay, so I'll tell you in my most recent position, I was doing a performance appraisal with my boss a couple of years back. And she said, Lori, and at that point, I believe I was the vice president of sales and revenue. Another position that I asked for, by the way, another position I asked for. So I applied for the position of corporate director of revenue. I was hired for the position of corporate director of revenue. The vice president of sales and marketing left. I recognized that there was a lot of alignment between revenue and sales. And if they were under one umbrella, what might that look like?
Hmm.
So I called on two people that I respect immensely. And I had dinner with them and I said, what do you think? And they said, Lori, you have to do it. And I doubted myself. But again, I called on the right two people that knew
Mhm.
me. They
Yeah.
knew my strengths, they knew my weaknesses, they knew my flaws, they knew my perfections. And that dinner was maybe one of the most valuable dinners in my career.
Wow.
Thank you, Joe Kelly and Kimberly Furlong, if they're out there somewhere.
Aw.
Um, and they convinced me, Lori, you already know sales. You go and you ask for that position. And so I did. I said, I want you to put sales under me. I want to be the vice president of sales and revenue. And if it doesn't work out, you can take the position back. I
Mhm.
gave him an out. I gave
Yeah.
Richard Kessler an escape hatch. If it doesn't work out, you can take it back. But I knew because again, I'm scrappy. He's never taking that back because I will kill myself to succeed at this. I will kill
Yes.
myself to do that.
Well, I
Forward,
want to call out, I want to say something really
yeah,
key there about giving the person an out. And it's such a brilliant thing to, I mean, the way that you asked for that. I love that because a lot of times I think a lot of us have the hardest time just asking for things,
right.
let alone thinking strategically about, oh, here's another option or possibility if it didn't work out. So I think that's fantastic. What were you going
Right.
to say?
Well, I was asking him to take a chance, to
Yes.
take a risk, if you will, but I was also giving him his escape hatch. So again,
Mhm.
we go back to these escape hatches
Your
where
dad.
I gave him and I said, if it doesn't work out, no harm. I'll go back to my old role. You can just take it away from me. It's fine. So fast forward about 5 years, I think at the time, and I'm now having a performance appraisal. And at the time I reported to Laura Kessler and Laura said to me, Lori, what is it that you want next in your career? What would take you away from Kessler? And I told her. It has always been my ultimate goal to be the chief revenue officer. And I know that this being a small company, you probably don't have room for that title here. And she said, okay. And I said, but that's my ultimate goal. And that's where I'm going to get. I'm going to go there eventually. She said, okay. And we never talked about it again. That was my performance appraisal. We went on. I want to tell you, maybe a year or two later, I'm at my performance appraisal with Laura Kessler. And she says, what do you think about this? And she writes 4 letters on her pad, CRMO. I said, what is that? She said, it's the Chief Revenue and Marketing Officer. And that's what we're going to promote you to. And I was blown away, Karen.
Wow.
There had never been that position at Kessler before. And it was never my expectation. It was never my expectation. And that's okay too. But it was always my goal. And I knew that it may mean at some point that I would have to leave Kessler to get that. I was going to be an officer of a company in the commercial world eventually. I was. So I knew as that, and I was very sure of myself, but it was never my expectation that Kessler would provide that. But I kept working towards it because I knew that if it was my goal, whether it was at Kessler or anywhere else, I had a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And so when she offered me that title and confirmed that I had earned that, it was a game changer for me. It was a game changer. And again, sitting at that place and looking back 40 years, 35 years earlier, 30 years earlier to at that point, someone who was making really crazy decisions. And all the statistics said that I would never be here. And I was there.
That's really powerful. That is such a good reminder for anybody listening to ask anyway. And what I love too is that you made your intentions known with such clarity. And then we can't control the outcome, right? You dropped the thing and said, okay, we'll see what happens. And I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, I want to focus on resilience because I know that is a massive thread throughout your entire life. Speak to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I jokingly say that falling flat on my face is my best trick. I am very fearless when it comes to failure because I know that there is always a tomorrow. I know that you can always start again. And I have learned that through a lot of failure along the way. Initially, again, it was the following of my parents and watching that. My parents were remarried, were divorced and married 3 times in my 15 years to each other. You want to talk?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, you want to talk about a love affair that wouldn't quit. It was like, just go your separate ways, for God's sake. It's just not going to work. But so, that's where you learn resilience early on, is you're just watching these 2 people that are not right for each other, but that will not give up even when they should. And then again, my own resilience and knowing, how could you know at that time? I remember that night very vividly that I made a very big decision about my own life. I was 20. My son was 2 years old in 1 month, and I'm sitting on the steps crying the night before, but being angry enough. I think that's the only emotion that I can think of in that moment, that no, this is not going to be my life. Because I knew enough at that point that there would always be another starting line. And Karen, in my life, starting lines are just, they're not nearly as important as where you finish. And there are so many finish lines. It does not matter how you start. It just doesn't. I started at Daytona State Community College. And every time someone would start to talk about their college experience when we were in the boardroom, I would pray to God that we would change the subject before they came around, because I didn't want to talk about my experience at Daytona Beach Community College at the time, when I'm sitting around people that were from Cornell, from Johnson and Wales, from universities. And then one day, and I would hide behind this college education that just served me so well. How dare I do that? One day, I was sitting around a boardroom. I was in Taos, New Mexico. I remember it vividly. I was at this beautiful property that we owned, and I'm sitting at the boardroom table. We're all executives all around the table. I am at the corporate level VP, and I'm sitting next to, at the time, the HR director. And as we're going around the table talking about our college stories, she was a graduate of Harvard. And I was sitting beside her as a graduate of Daytona Beach Community College.
Oh,
And my title was premium to hers. And not that that mattered to her or to me, but in the moment, it was the most profound moment that I had. In that moment, I said, wow, look what my education has done. I'm sitting here beside you, who spent a whole lot more than I did. But clearly, we both made it to this boardroom table. And we're
yes.
sitting next to each other as
Ah,
equals.
exhilarating.
Yeah, it was good. It was good.
That is incredible, Lori. Well,
Yeah.
I do feel like we could talk all day. And one thing I want to ask you is, as we wrap up here, is what haven't I asked you that you would like to share?
I think it's only fair when we talk about women and their voice and their journey to success, is to also remember there are sacrifices along the way. It does not matter if you are a woman or you are a man, if you are a C-suite, if you are a VP, if you are a mother, a stay-at-home mother, there are sacrifices you are going to make along the way. We all make them. You have to decide what tolerance you have for the sacrifice that you will need to make to decide on that next thing, whatever that is. My daughter-in-law made a decision to hold her career where it was so that she could be home for her 4 babies. And that is a decision, that is a sacrifice that she has made, that it is a sacrifice that is serving her very well. Our journeys are varied. My journey was to the C-suite, but that journey, there were a lot of sacrifices along the way. And even today, there are sacrifices that I make. I think that is so important, is that if everything is equal, then everything is equal. And so my journey is no different than that of the man beside me or the other woman on the other side of me. We all got to this boardroom table equally making sacrifices to get here. So outside of using my voice, being resourceful and resilient, I also knew what I would need to give up in order to gain. And I think that that is something you need to come to terms with along the way.
That's awesome. I mean, that is really wise. So great. Thank you, Lori. Anything else?
No, this was great. I love
this
talking to
was
you.
so fun. Thank you for being here, Lori. And I look forward to more conversations in the future. And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.